Secure synopsis of 17th May 2021. Let us have a look at the question and the answers of each topic under the secure synopsis. Hi, welcome back to another video. This is Karthik Reddy and I'll be reading out the secure synopsis. Okay, let's get started. The first topic is under General Studies 1. The topic is population and associated issues, poverty and developmental issues, urbanization, their problems and their remedies. As this pandemic generation joins the workforce in an economy that is failing to provide adequate employment opportunities to its current strength, India's chances of leveraging upon its demographic dividend looks overemphasized. Comment. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. This is mostly related to me and you because we fall in this demographic dividend and the potential that we hold to contribute to this country. If proper jobs are provided, proper opportunities are provided from the government or from the private sector that the government is allowed to set up. Okay, let's get started. India has long been touted as the next big economic growth story after China. One of the primary reasons for that has been its young population, which constitutes 59% of all Indians. The hope has remained that as the young Indian population enters the working age, it will lead to higher economic growth. Pandemic generation, COVID 19, and its impact on working generation. Let's have a look at some of the points given under this. Even before the COVID 19 pandemic, unemployment levels in India had hit a 45-year high. As of 2017-2018, only half of the people in the working age were actually working. In 2004-2005, the same proportion was 63%. Moreover, the troubled scenario of education and skills is evident from the Pratham surveys that are released each year. In 2018, it showed that just half of the children in the fifth standard could read a text from the second standard. The pandemic has worsened the situation. The latest State of India's Environment Report, released by the Center for Science and Environment, finds that an astounding 375 million children may suffer long lasting impacts due to the pandemic, including being underweight and stunted, which will lead to losses in education and economic productivity. Government programs like midday meal schemes, which encourage school enrollment, have taken a hit during the pandemic. Even those students who managed to remain enrolled have faced difficulties in accessing education due to the vast digital divides across income groups. As this pandemic generation joins the workforce in an economy that is failing to provide adequate employment opportunities to its current strength, India's chances of leveraging upon its demographic dividend are soon becoming obscure. There is little to no hope that things will be in any direction or different moving forward. The possibility of India falling into a middle income trap are higher than the chances of reaping a demographic dividend. Measures needed to reap demographic dividend. Need to have a decentralized models of development. Social policies for each state must be differentiated to accommodate different rates of population growth. The populations in South and West India are growing at a much slower pace than in the central and eastern states. Need to utilize the energies of all sections of society, including women and senior citizens too. According to IMF research, raising women's participation in the labor force to the same level as men can boost India's GDP by 27% and contribute additively to India's GDP growth every year. Government driven programs should also target people between the ages of 60 to 75 so as to ensure they remain employable. Need to improve social security architecture by incentivizing investments and savings in retirement schemes, pension funds. The focus should be on informal sector, which constitute the majority of workforce. India's social security shortfall will increase from $3 trillion in 2015 to $85 trillion in 2050, which needs to be addressed. Government can also consider increasing the retirement age to capture this changing trend. Fewer jobs are labor intensive these days, while raising life expectancies are encouraging longer working lives. And today's higher incomes are also encouraging people to work for longer. Fostering these trends can help the economic growth of these nations at the forefront of aging impacts, as is especially true of Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, Korea, and China. Let's conclude the answer. Demographic dividend without investments in human capital will be a wasted development opportunity, and it will further widen economic and social gaps instead of narrowing them. Investing more and more efficiently in people will enable India to tap into its demographic dividend and prepare the country for the future. Let's move on to the next topic, Important geophysical phenomena such as earthquakes, tsunami, volcanic activity, cyclone, geographical features and their location changes in critical geographical features, including water bodies and ice caps, and in flora and fauna and the effects of such changes. Discuss the phenomena of cloudburst. How is it different from regular rainfall? Analyze the Indian dimension of it. Now, let's have a look at the answer to this question. Cloudburst like events have hit Uttarakhand since May 3rd and have caused considerable damage in the four hilly districts of Tehri Garhwal, Rudraprayag, Uttarkashi, and Chamoli. The latest of these occurred on the evening of May 11 in Devaprayag town of Tehri Garhwal district. Let's have a look at the understanding of cloudburst as a concept. Cloudbursts are sudden and extreme rainfall events over a limited area in a short span of time. Indian Meteorological Department defines a cloudburst as any event where 100 millimeters of rainfall have fallen in a span of an hour over a region that is 20 to 30 square kilometers in an area. A cloudburst is short term extreme precipitation that takes place over a small area. That is, if rainfall of about 10 centimeters or above per hour is recorded over a place that is roughly 10 kilometers versus 10 kilometers in area, it is classified as a cloudburst event. Differentiating factor of cloudburst vis-a-vis regular rainfall. A cloudburst occurs when a moisture carrying air moves up a hilly terrain, forming a vertical column of clouds known as cumulonimbus clouds. Such clouds usually cause rain, thunder, and lightning. This upward motion of the clouds is known as an orographic lift. These unstable clouds cause an intense rainstorm over a small area after becoming heavy enough and locked the ridges and valleys between the hills. The energy necessary for the cloudburst comes from the upward motion of air. Cloudbursts mostly occur at elevations between 1000 to 2500 meters above sea level. The moisture is usually provided by a low pressure system, usually associated with cyclonic storms in the ocean, or the Gangetic plains associated with low level winds flowing in from the east. Sometimes winds flowing in from the northwest also aid the occurrence of cloudbursts. The many factors that have to come together to make a cloudburst event happen make them highly unlikely. Cloudburst and Indian dimension. Uttarakhand is highly prone to cloudburst events. 19 of the 30 major cloudburst events reported from the southern rim of the Himalayas in the Earth Science Reviews study occurred in Uttarakhand. In 2019, there was a cloudburst event in Chamori district, while there were a dozen of these events in 2018. But the official response to these events has been slow. In Jan 2021, the IMD and state government installed a Doppler weather radar in Mukteshwar and Kumaon, which had been in the pipeline for many years. Cloudbursts do happen in plains as well, but there is a greater probability of them occurring in mountainous zones. It has to do with terrain. Cloudbursts happen when saturated clouds are unable to produce rain because of the upward movement of very warm current of air. Raindrops, instead of dropping down, are carried upwards by the air current. New drops are formed and existing raindrops gain in size. After a point, the raindrops become too heavy for the cloud to hold on to and they drop down together in a quick flash. Hilly terrains aid in heated air currents, rising vertically upwards, thereby increasing the probability of a cloudburst situation. Let's conclude the answer. There is a paucity of past data on cloudbursts. In addition, since only some of them get counted, only those that result in death and destruction, there is a problem of accuracy as well. But what is very clear is that events of extreme precipitation have been on the rise in the last few decades due to global warming. It is expected, keeping in mind the trend that cloudburst events might be on the increase as well. Let's move on to the next topic, role of women and women's organization, population and associated issues, poverty and developmental issues, urbanization, their problems and their remedies, social empowerment. Let's read out the first question under this. By weighing the COVID 19 impact on women employment, account for the implications of Universal Basic Services Program as an opportunity for economic empowerment of women in India. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. The COVID 19 pandemic has destroyed millions of livelihoods and led to a sudden and large increase in poverty and a massive disruption of the labor market in India. Women workers, in particular, have borne a disproportionate burden as the country meets the challenge of the second wave of the pandemic. It is crucial to learn lessons from the first wave to chart the policy path ahead. Let's have a look at the body to this question and have a look at how it's impacted upon the employment of women. In 2020, the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy showed that 39% of women lost their jobs in April and May compared to 29% of men, corroborating the UN's fears of COVID 19's compounding impact on already low paid and insecurely employed poor women. India's unequal gender division of household work has also worsened during the pandemic. Women spend, which is the unpaid, three times or even six times more time than men in household work. Even by the end of the year, 47% of employed women who had lost jobs during the lockdown had not returned to work. The equivalent number for men was only 7%. Nearly 33% of formal salaried men moved into self employment and 9% into daily wage work between 2019 and 2020. In contrast, women had fewer options. Only 4% and 3% of formal salaried women moved into self employment and daily wage work, respectively. Nearly half of the women workers, irrespective of whether they were salaried, casual, or self employed, withdrew from the workforce as compared to only 11% of men. Even as new entrants to the workforce, women workers had poorer options compared to men. Women were more likely to enter as daily wage workers, while men found avenues for self employment. Daily wage work is typically far less remunerative than self employment, as on average. Between September to October 2020, a daily wage worker earned about 7,965 compared to a self employed worker who earned nearly twice that amount. Only did women enter into more precarious work, it was also likely to be at very low earnings compared to men. Universal Basic Services Program for Women Empowerment. The time is right to imagine a bold Universal Basic Services Program that not only fills existing vacancies in the social sector, but also expands public investments in health, education, child and elderly care, and so on to be prepared for future shocks. This can help bring women into the workforce not only by directly creating employment for them, but also by alleviating some of their domestic work burdens, while also overcoming nutritional and educational deficits that we are likely to be confronted with as we emerge from this crisis. The following measures are indeed needed now: expansion of the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act and the introduction of an urban employment guarantee targeted to women as soon as the most severe forms of mobility restrictions are lifted. We further propose coordinated efforts by states to facilitate employment of women while also addressing immediate needs through the setting up of community kitchens, prioritizing the opening of schools and Anganwadi centers, and engagement with self help groups for the production of personal protective equipment kits. Further, a COVID 19 hardship allowance of at least 5,000 per month for 6 months should be announced for 2.5 million accredited social health activists, who are also called as ASHA workers, and also Anganwadi workers, who most of whom are actually women. But this is not enough. The national employment policy currently in the works should systematically address the constraints around the participation of women's workforce, both with respect to the availability of work and household responsibilities. The pandemic has shown the necessity of adequate public investment in social infrastructure. Let's conclude the answer to this question. There is no one size fits all strategy, as multiple issues are plaguing women workforce participation in India. If women's workforce participation in India is realized to its full potential and given India's demographic dividend, it can easily achieve the target of $5 trillion economy. Let's move on to the next topic, that is modern Indian history from about middle of the 18th century until the present, significant events, personalities and issues. Account for the contribution of Basavanna to Indian literature and philosophy. This is mostly related to Basava Jayanti that was celebrated last week. Let's have a look at the answer to this question. Basavanna belongs to Karnataka, and he has put in some of the most tremendous social transformation thoughts in the Karnataka. And also, if most of the India has learnt about Basavanna, even they would have been transformed by his thoughts and ideals that everybody should be treated equal, especially women. Basavanna was the 12th century philosopher, statesman, Kannada poet, and a social reformer during the reign of the Kalachuri dynasty, King Bijala I in Karnataka. Basavanna spread social awareness through his poetry, popularly known as Vachanas. Basavanna rejected gender or social discrimination, superstitions, and rituals. Let's have a look at the background for this question. He rejected gender or social discrimination, superstitions, and rituals, but introduced Ishthalinga with an image of Shivalinga to every person, regardless of his or her birth, to be a constant reminder of one's bhakti to Shiva. He established the Anubhava Mantapa, the hall of spiritual experience, a place that Alama Prabhu and Akka Mahadevi became a part of it. Anubhava Mantapa was established as a spiritual and socio-religious academy. It welcomed men and women from all socio-economic backgrounds to discuss spiritual and mundane questions of life in open. Basava was later conferred the title of Basavanna, that is Basava the elder brother. Basavanna's contribution to Indian literature. Basaveshwara and his associate Sharanas started and enriched a literary form that had a university of appeal. The Vachana or brief prose, that is poetry lyric. Vachana literature committed to social upliftment and self realization was simple enough to be understood by the most ignorant and great enough to be admired by the sophisticated. Several works are contributed or attributed to Basavanna, which are revered in the Lingayat community. These include various vachanas such as the Shat Sthala Vachana, discourses of the six stages of salvation, Kala Gnana Vachana, forecasts of the future, Mantra Gopya, Ghatna Chakra Vachana, and Raja Yoga Vachana. Basavanna's contribution to philosophy. Basavanna grew up in a family with a tradition of Shaivism. As a leader, he developed and inspired a new devotional movement named Veerashaivas, or ardent heroic worshippers of Shiva. Veerashaiva movement developed a school of poor priests. It abolished the old priestly class. It adopted the vernacular as the medium for inculcating the supreme truth into the people. It gave to women an important place in religious and social life. It prescribed one ideal of realization for every individual, high or low. The movement shared its roots in the ongoing Tamil Bhakti movement, particularly the Shaiva and Iyenar's traditions, over the 7th to 11th century. However, Basavanna championed devotional worship that rejected temple worship and rituals led by Brahmins and replaced it with personalized direct worship of Shiva through practices such as individually woven icons and symbols like a small linga. This approach brought Shiva's presence to everyone and at all times without gender, class, or caste discrimination. Basavanna staunchly believed in a caste-less society where each individual had equal opportunity to rise up and live in life. To give force to the noble mission, he conceptualized Anubhava Mantapa, an academy of mystics, saints, and philosophers of the Lingayat faith, and acted as the fountainhead of thoughts on a common human values and ethics. His poems, such as Basavanna 703, speak of strong sense of gender equality and community bond, willing to wage war for the right cause, yet being a fellow devotee's bride at the time of his or her need. Let's conclude the answer to this question. During 12th century, Lord Basaveshwara brought the revolution in various facets and stood against the social evils of the traditionalistic society. Being India's first thinker, he became the social reformer. Basaveshwara has contributed immensely towards the well-being of society and overall development of human relations. Let's move on to the next topic under general studies 2. The topic is statutory, regulatory, and various quasi judicial bodies. Establishing the National Tribunal Commission could possibly entail a radical restructuring of the present tribunal systems. Discuss in the backdrop of the recent issues facing the functioning of tribunals in India. Okay, now let us have a look at the tribunals and the issues relating to tribunals in India. Okay, the center has abolished several appellate tribunals and authorities and transferred their jurisdiction to other existing judicial bodies through the tribunals reforms. That is, Rationalization and Conditions of Service Ordinance 2021. This ordinance has been challenged in the Supreme Court. Let's have a look at the body of this answer. Tribunals and their mandate. The original constitution did not contain provisions with respect to tribunals. That is, the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 added a new Part 14A to the Constitution. This part is entitled as Tribunals and consists of only two articles, that is Article 323A dealing with administrative tribunals and Article 323B dealing with tribunals for other matters. Article 323A empowers the Parliament to provide for the establishment of administrative tribunals for the adjudication of disputes relating to recruitment and conditions of service of persons appointed to public services of the center, the states, local bodies, public corporations, and other public authorities. Under Article 323b, the Parliament and the state legislatures are authorized to provide for the establishment of tribunals for the adjudication of disputes relating to the following matters: taxation, foreign exchange, import and export, industrial and labor, land reforms, ceiling on urban property, elections to parliament and state legislatures. Now, let's have a look at the recent issues in the functioning of the tribunals. In India, executive interference in the functioning of tribunals is often seen in matters of appointment and removal of tribunal members, as well as in provisions of finances, infrastructure, personnel, and other resources required for day to day functioning of the tribunals. The Union Ministry of Finance framed a new set of rules called the Tribunal Appellate Tribunal and Other Authorities, Qualifications, Experience, and Other Conditions of Service of Members, Rules 2020, that prescribe uniform norms for the appointment and service conditions of members to various tribunals. The new rules have been framed by the government, as the previous rules of 2017 were struck down by the Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court in November 2019 in the case of Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank. The new rules do not remove the control of parent administrative ministries, that is, ministries against which the tribunals have to pass orders, or tribunals. For examples, the tribunals such as the Armed Forces Tribunal functions under the same ministry which is party in litigation, and the ministry also wields rule-making powers and controls finances, infrastructure, and manpower in the tribunal. The new rules also ensure that the secretary of the ministry against which the tribunal is to pass orders sits on the committee for selecting adjudicating members of the same tribunal. The system was termed as the mockery of the Constitution by Supreme Court in Madras Bar Association case of 2014. The Centre is yet to constitute a National Tribunals Commission, an independent umbrella body to supervise the functioning of tribunals, appointment of and disciplinary proceedings against members, and to take care of administrative and infrastructural needs of the tribunals. The idea of an NTC, that is National Tribunals Commission, was first mooted in L. Chandrakumar versus Union of India, 1997, but it has still not seen the light of the day. What is the restructuring with National Tribunal Commission? Initiating dialogue and promoting awareness about the NTC is vital for overcoming the government's inertia in establishing such a body. Developing an independent oversight body for accountable governance requires a legal framework that protects its independence and impartiality. The NTC would ideally take on some duties relating to administration and oversight. It could set performance standards for the efficiency of tribunals and their own administrative processes. Importantly, it could function as an independent recruitment body to develop and operationalize the procedure for disciplinary proceedings and appointment of tribunal members, giving the NTC the authority to set members' salaries, allowances, and other service conditions subject to regulations would help maintain tribunals' independence. Administrative roles of the NTC include providing support services to tribunal members, litigants, and their lawyer. For this purpose, it would need to be to hire, supervise, and administrative staff and to consolidate, improve, modernize tribunals' infrastructure. Therefore, the NTC must be established via a constitutional amendment or be backed by a statute that guarantees its functional, operational, and financial independence. One of the main reasons that has motivated the idea of NTC is the need for an authority to support uniform administration across all tribunals. The NTC could therefore pave the way for the separation of the administrative and judicial functions carried out by various tribunals. Now, let's conclude the answer to this question, as the Finance Ministry has been vested with the responsibility of tribunals until the NTC is constituted. It should come up with a transition plan. The way to reform the tribunal system is to look at solutions from a systematic perspective supported by evidence. Establishing the NTC will definitely entail a radical restructuring of the present tribunal system. Let's move on to the next topic, that is issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education, human resources, important aspects of governance, transparency, and accountability, e governance applications, models, successes, limitations, and potential, citizens' charters, transparency and accountability, and institutional measures. Explain the challenges facing medical education in India. Is the value added role of the private sector in medical education a befitting response to these concerns? Now, let's have a look at the answers to this question. The serious shortage of health workers, especially doctors in some northern states, is a major impediment for achieving the health related sustainable development goals. Right? Health workers are critical not just for the functioning of health systems, but also for the preparedness of health systems in preventing, detecting, and responding to threats posed by diseases such as COVID 19. Okay, this shows the inherent issues in medical education in India. Challenges facing medical education in India: interstate and intrastate inequality in the distribution of manpower and resources. There is a huge disparity in availability of opportunities for students across states. 2010 report by MH Hardy had stated that four states, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu, account for 1.3 lakh out of 2.4 lakh medical seats across India. Do you see this huge amount of disparity? Just four states in India, according to 2010 report, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu account for 1.3 lakh out of 2.4 lakh medical seats across India, which means the number of doctors are mostly located in the southern part of India. There is also a glaring rural urban disparity in both availabilities of healthcare and colleges. A blanket standard for starting a medical college leads to neglect of states like Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Nagaland, etc., and rural areas. Amidst this situation, new medical colleges can bring in uniformity of access across states and fill the demand supply gap. MCR regulations prevent experienced MBBS doctors from carrying out procedures like cesareans and ultrasound tests. Experienced nurses are barred from administering anesthesia. This leads to failure of utilizing the experienced manpower to increase the service delivery. Another casualty of the super specialty craze is research and teaching. So, no one is choosing research or teaching as their preferred career choice, right? Let's have a look at the can private participating elevate the concerns to meet the significant shortfall of qualified doctors in northern states. Scaling up of medical education is warranted. However, the Niti Ayog's proposal of allowing private entities to take over district hospitals for converting them into teaching hospitals with at least 150 MBBS seats may sound attractive, but there are reasons to be deeply concerned about it. Through the implementation of such a policy, the private sector in medical education will be encouraged. It will also directly aid the corporatization processes of healthcare provisioning, while the under resourced public health system will be a collateral damage. District hospitals are considered as the last resort for the poor. The corporatization will make the services very costly and exclude them from getting care. Even from the perspective of producing more doctors to meet the shortages in under reserved areas, this is unlikely to yield the desired result. Private players treat medical education as a business. Additionally, the medical graduates trained in such private sector managed medical colleges will prefer to find employment in corporate hospitals and not in rural areas to regain their investment. Further, this proposal is not aligned with India's national health policy goals like achieving universal health care and health equity. Instead, it will widen health inequalities further. Now, let's have a look conclusion to this. There should be a substantial step up in public investment in medical education. By establishing new medical colleges, the government can increase student intake as well as enhance equitable access to medical education. Besides, it must allocate adequate financial resources to strengthen the overall capacity of existing medical colleges to enrich student learning and improve output. Let's have a look at the general studies part 4. The topic is work culture. What is ethical climate and why is it important for any organization? Explain with suitable examples. Let's have a look at the solutions to this. Introduction. Organizational ethical climate refers to the moral atmosphere of the work environment and the level of ethics practiced within a company. Instrumental, caring, law and order, rules, and independence are the five types of climates that can exist in an organization. Imbecility, harassment, aggression, and discrimination can all produce an unethical and hostile work environment, which can create dissatisfied employees, while a positive ethical environment can make employees more productive and even happier. Let's have a look at the body of this question. An organization's ethical climate refers to the shared perceptions of managers and employees about what constitutes ethical and unethical behavior in the organization. Let's have a look at the ethical climate and the context to it. An organization's formal ethical context is distinct from its informal ethical context. The formal context, also known as hard controls, consists of the tangible and explicit parts of an organization, such as its plans, policies, and procedures. An ethics program is regarded as the most relevant component of the formal ethical context and consists of ethics instruments and measures such as a written code of ethics, an ethics training module, a policy on whistleblowing, and an ethics monitoring system. The informal context, also called soft controls, consists of the intangible and implicit parts of an organization, such as the shared assumptions, values, and expectations. Two of the most important components of this ethical context are the organization's ethical climate and ethical culture. Importance of ethical climate. Organizations rely on many factors to run smoothly and efficiently. Any issues that arise can affect the daily workflow of employees. Due to these issues, it is imperative that an organization has created an ethical environment. Today, society has been going through major changes morally, religiously, and politically, which makes it even more important that an organization has established its ethical culture or climate. When organizations do not properly establish an ethical climate, an unethical may take its place. An unethical climate is when questionable behavior takes place and there is little action being taken to correct it. This is why implementing a company's ethical standards is so important. By having these standards in place, it can eliminate a lot of behavioral vice deemed as unethical. If an ethical climate is implemented properly, individuals have the knowledge on how to deal with the unethical behaviors when they arise. Organizations can proactively create an ethical climate by its leadership, formal policies, and establishing its core values. These factors shape the decision making process of individuals in order to handle unethical behaviors. Having an ethical climate helps to organize a strong an organization strongly and also run it smoothly. 1 second, let me just refresh this page because it seems to be zoomed in. I don't know why. But, anyways, let's finish it. Organizations rely on many factors to run smoothly and efficiently, right? We already had a look at this. Let's have a look at the ensuring ethical climate in an organization. Clarity, the organization makes concrete, comprehensive, and understandable to managers and employees what sort of ethical behavior they are expected from them. Congruency of senior managers, the organization's senior managers get a good example for employees regarding ethics. Congruency of supervisors, the organization supervisors set a good examples for employees regarding ethics. Feasibility, the organization provides sufficient resources, example time, budget, information, equipment for employees to behave ethically. Supportability, the organization creates a shared commitment to behaving ethically through fair treatment and mutual trust within the organization. Transparency, the organization makes ethical and unethical behavior and their consequences visible to those who can act upon them. Discussability, the organization provides a room within the organization for managers and employees to raise and discuss ethical dilemma, alleged unethical behavior. Sanctionability, managers and employees are punished for behaving unethically and rewarded for behaving ethically. Conclusion, with ethical issues continuously arise in organizations, it is imperative that an ethical climate has been set. When the ethical climate is in place, organization can run more efficiently. Although there are factors that can interfere with an ethical climate, it is important that individuals have their existence, like the biases that can occur during decision making. When individuals are aware of these factors, there is less of a chance of seeing the other person, somebody else, and that should not become a scandal in one's organization. Ethics will always be an important feature that helps build the structure of an organization. That is why it is absolutely important for each and every individual that who needs to have a clear understanding of its ethical climate in the organization. Thank you so much for being part of this wonderful video. I hope you liked it. Please press the like button and also subscribe to my channel. See you again in the next video. Until then, have a fantastic life.